the test or the results of the testing. Instead, it deals with the misuse of the testing data. Lloyd Smith will discuss this paper in Project 4, Presenting a Technical Paper, from the Advanced Communication Manual, Technical Presentations. Lloyd Smith, When Bad Things Happen to Good Data.
This is an exciting time of the year. We're almost at Labor Day, and that means all the kids will be going back to school in the next week or so. But for those of us who spent time working with educational data, like me, the excitement is not in the kids going back to school. It's waiting for all of the test results to show up. And over the next several weeks to about a month, we'll start seeing the articles in the paper about the state testing and all of the national and international testing. You're all familiar with those articles in the paper. They look like little football league standings, and they show how the various states rank, or how the various countries rank against one another, or how various schools in the region rank. The question is, what do those numbers mean? And the other question is, can they be misused? Well, I'm not going to deal with the first question. The reason is it would take many, many months to answer that, and you would all be very, very bored. A friend of mine in the educational assessment business often says, numbers are my friend. And I always tell him, well, mine too, but they're not my only friend. Now, what I do want to talk about, though, is how those test numbers are misused. Because when you see those charts in the paper, what you also hear are people complaining about the way the schools are. If you look for a moment at your article, when bad things happen to good NAEP data, NAEP is, as Lee mentioned, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. The reason that's a really important test is that it is the one and only test that compares reading and math scores across the United States. It's a highly respected exam. It's put together by a commission, a national commission, that's under the auspices of the U.S. Department of Education, but independent of it. It's somewhat like the Congressional Budget Office. Congress really doesn't control it, but it funds it. That commission hires private contractors, educational contractors, testing contractors. The technical name for that is psychometricians. It's kind of a combination of psychology and statistics, if you can imagine that. But anyway, they actually create the test, they administer it, and they provide the data. The way it works is really interesting. The assessment coordinator of a school district gets a call from one of these contractors and says, your district has been selected to volunteer to participate in the NAEP testing. Not really voluntary. If you refuse, you lose all of your federal education dollars. So most people oddly decide to go along with the program. But when they send the contractor in, they say, okay, we want these kids, and they hand you a list of kids from your roster. What they're looking for is a national cross-section. So if your district, for example, is 30% Hispanic, then 30% of the kids they pick are going to be Hispanic kids. If it's 52% female, they're going to ask for 52% females, and so on. They don't allow the schools or school districts to cherry pick particular kids. They name the kids. Then when they churn all of the data through their computers, they report it back at the state level. And then there are also 5 large cities that get independent reports. I'm talking about cities like New York and Los Angeles and so on, really big cities. They don't report the scores back to local schools or school districts because in one individual school, it might only be 5 or 6 kids who get tested, not every kid. There are 3 different tests. There are 3 different grade levels tested, 4, 8, and 12. And there are 2 subjects at each grade level, reading and math. No kid ever does all of the testing. Now what they use this data for is to try to create what they call longitudinal results. If you flip back to the last 2 pages of your handout, I included the state report card for Washington State at grade 4 for both reading and math. And you can look at this later and decide what it says. But it tries to indicate how Washington State kids are doing relative to kids in the rest of the nation. Now that's valuable to know because Washington, like every other state, has an independent education system. We are entirely unique in the United States in that regard. Every other modern industrialized country has a national school system. So the kids everywhere learn the same thing, they probably use the same textbooks and so on. In the United States, we have 50 separate school systems, one for each state, and each state jealously guards its prerogatives. In addition, most of the states allow individual school districts, and we have those here in Washington too, 273 individual school districts. In other words, fourth grade math at Eastmont is not the same as fourth grade math at Wenatchee, which is not the same as fourth grade math at Leavenworth, and so on. Could be totally different teaching materials, different books, different everything. I can tell by the looks on some of your faces that you're wondering, how could that be? That's the way state law is. It's been that way since Washington was a state. It's actually specified in the state constitution that there should be independent school districts in each, well, not each county, there's more than one in most counties. Anyway, that's why a test like the NAEP is so important. It's the only way to measure how kids are doing across the nation and compare them to each other. Now, you may have heard of No Child Left Behind, the federal program that has tests. Well, each state has a different test. So the Washington state test, for example, produces results. The Idaho test produces results. You can't compare them. It's an apples and oranges thing. That's why you need a test like the NAEP. Now, that's pretty straightforward. NAEP scores show up, they form charts like you see on the last 2 pages of the handout there. You can read through that stuff if you want. The problem is how the data is used, and that's actually what I want to talk about. What we're going to do is look on the handout, and you see these little boxes every now and then that says parsing claims. Look at the first one of those on the first page. What happens very quickly every year after the NAEP data is released, it's in the lower right-hand part of the first page there. As it says here, advocates are fond of making claims about what data from the NAEP mean, but not all of them stand up. For example, think of this quotation. This is from a guy named Joel I. Klein, who before he was fired in 2010 was the chancellor of the New York City school system, the biggest school district in the nation. And his co-author is the Reverend Al Sharpton, noted educational expert, who I'm sure you've all heard of. Now look what they say here. Public education is supposed to be the great equalizer in America, which it is. Yet today, the average 12th grade Black or Hispanic student has the reading, writing, and math skills of an 8th grade white student. In other words, what they looked at was the NAEP data, and it showed that the score for the average 12th grade Black kid was equal to the score for the average 8th grade white kid. Now the implication is obviously what? What are they trying to claim based on this? What's happening to the Black kids?
They're not educated enough.
Yeah, they're being badly educated, and it needs somehow to be fixed. However, as it says here under problem, NAEP scales differ by subject and grade. In other words, a 240 on the 8th grade reading test doesn't mean the same thing as a 240 on the 12th grade reading test. Okay? Now, how would you know that? Well, you could read the little pamphlet they give out with the NAEP results. It's on page 2. It's under the heading that says cautions, where they're warning people how not to interpret the data. And yet this is the quotation that showed up in the Wall Street Journal on the op-ed page. So when you see people do that, say, well, look, 8th grade kids, are not improving over what they were over the 4th grade scores. With different tests, different kids even, okay? So in other words, suppose the 4th graders average 240 in reading and the 8th graders average 230. Something terrible must have happened. No, it's a different group of kids. It's like comparing 2 football teams. Last year's football team won 11 games. This year's football team only won 9. So they must be crappy. They got worse. No, different kids. A bunch of them graduated and new kids showed up on the team. Notice the second page, on page 2 here, the second box. This is from an advocacy organization called Students First. I don't really know anything about that group. I've never heard of them before. But notice what it says here. Among these low-performing students on the 2009 NAEP reading, 49% come from low-income families. Even more alarming is the fact that more than 67% of all U.S. 4th graders scored below proficient, meaning they're not reading at grade level. On the NAEP, at various levels in the score, it'll say like below average, above average, proficient, different titles for the different brackets in the scoring. But notice the problem. NAEP's definition of the word proficient is based on challenging material, and it's considered harder than grade level. In other words, if a kid scores proficient on the NAEP, it means he's at the top of his grade level, not in the middle or the average or the low end of it or whatever. It's not the low bar, it's the high bar, in other words. How would you know that? It's in the little pamphlet that shows you how to interpret the scores. It's on page 3, where it warns you, do not use this word proficient without providing a definition for it. But here we are. You know, basically it's telling us that poor kids are somehow disadvantaged and therefore score low, but 2/3 of all the 4th graders are below proficient. Well, sure they are. 2/3 of anybody's below the high standard of anything. That's the way it goes. It wouldn't be a high standard if everybody was meeting it, would it? I mean, obviously. Now, skip over the next set of boxes and look at the one that's on page 3. This is the most mystifying one of all. So we're on page 3, it's down near the bottom of the page there. This is from a real estate website called Neighborhood Scout. I've never heard of this. Steve, have you ever heard of this?
I have not.
Yeah, there are lots of things like this. You may not know this if you haven't bought a house recently, but it's possible to find sites and actually maybe individual real estate corporations provide this data that will compare the schools in various neighborhoods for quality. And the idea is when people buy houses, they prefer to buy them in school districts that have higher test scores, thinking that that means that the schools are better. But notice what these guys did. I used to be a member of an organization called the American Educational Research Association. It talks about how to do statistics. And I've read this over and over and over, and I'm not sure exactly what these guys are thinking. We subtracted the percentage of students in the state who scored proficient or better from the state's NCLB test, No Child Left Behind test, from the percentage of students in that state who passed the NAEP, and used the difference to align each school and district test scores across the nation. In other words, they subtracted apples from oranges and then used that number to get something. The thing is, NAEP scores do not show scores for individual schools and school districts. So they either made this number up or they're lying, one of the two. It's an amazing thing. Now, finally, look back at that box that we skipped, the one that starts down at the bottom of page 2. This is the thought I want to leave you with, the most important possible thing. They're talking here about the difference between correlation and causation. What it says here, and I'll look at the second one of these. In Charlotte, North Carolina, and Austin, Texas, both cities in right-to-work states where collective bargaining is not required, students in 4th and 8th grade are performing higher than the national average in both reading and math. They're implying what? The reason the scores are high is because there's no collective bargaining, no unionized teachers. Okay, think about this. Suppose you go out in the community and you measure shirt sleeve lengths, and you discover that professional basketball players have longer shirt sleeve lengths on the average than regular guys. Does that mean that professional basketball causes long shirt sleeves? Or does it mean the other way around? Long shirt sleeves cause you to become a professional basketball player? Of course not. They're just two things that happen close together. That doesn't imply that one of them caused the other. There is no way to derive causal links from NAEP data. Cannot be done. And yet everybody, liberals and conservatives alike, do this over and over and over. Liberals will say, well, look, poor kids do poorer on the test, and that means we need more money in the schools. No, it does not. And the conservatives will say, well, look, unionized teachers cause the scores to go down. No, they do not. They happen close to each other, but that doesn't mean one of them causes the other. If you forget everything else I say, remember correlation and causation. The fact that two things happen near one another does not mean that they're linked in cause and effect. It just means they happen close to each other. And when you see these scores, all these test scores in the paper, look at them with a grain of salt. And remember that almost anybody who's talking about these things just flat doesn't know what he's talking about.
That's really encouraging.